first thing you should know about me is that I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a house where my dad taught me how to change a tire in the dark, where we did walkthroughs of our emergency plan twice a year, where my mom kept pepper spray in the kitchen drawer next to the oven mitts. Paranoia, or what other people call paranoia, was just called being prepared where I come from. That's the context I'm asking you to hold on to, because the reason what happened to me still bothers me isn't that I was afraid, it's that I stopped being afraid at exactly the moment I should have been most afraid, and by the time I understood the actual shape of what was happening to me, there was already almost a year of it behind me, and the worst part I'll never get to know. I'd moved into the house about 8 months before any of this started. It was a small 2-bedroom on a cul-de-sac in a town that's mostly retired couples and young families with strollers. I had a remote job. I'd decided I didn't need to be in the city anymore, and a friend of mine had flagged the listing in this little community off a rural exit where I could have a yard and a driveway and pay less than I was paying for a studio. I took it almost sight unseen. The driveway is honestly what sold me. There's a photo in my camera roll from my first week there, me standing next to my car in the driveway, grinning at the phone. I don't look at that photo anymore. For the first few months, nothing happened. I worked from the kitchen table during the day, took a walk around the block in the evenings, and on Thursdays, I drove the 20 minutes into town for groceries. I knew my neighbors by sight, not by name. The couple directly across the street had 3 kids and a minivan that was almost always in the driveway. An older woman 2 doors down walked a shepherd mix every morning at 7. I had the kind of life where I could name every car that normally parked on my street, which is probably why I noticed the one that didn't belong. The first time I saw it, it was a Tuesday in early September, around 6 in the evening. I was bringing the recycling bin back up from the curb, and I noticed a dark sedan parked on the opposite side of the street, maybe 2 houses down from mine, facing my direction. Windows tinted darker than I thought was legal in our state. Nobody inside. I remember thinking it looked out of place. None of my neighbors drove anything that new, but I figured it was somebody's visitor, a food delivery, a friend of a friend parked while they ran in. I went back inside and forgot about it within the hour. By the morning, the car was gone. I want to say that's where it starts, but looking back, it probably isn't. That's just the first time I noticed. About 10 days later, I was at the grocery store across town. The good one, the one with the deli counter. And when I was loading my trunk, I looked up and saw what I thought might be the same car 4 rows away. Dark sedan, tinted windows. I stared at it for a second, then told myself I was being ridiculous. Thousands of cars look like that. It's a boring car. I closed the trunk and I drove home. The third time was the one that got under my skin. I'd been at a friend's place for dinner and was coming home around 11, and as I pulled into my driveway, my headlights swept across the street and lit up the front of a parked car. Same make, same tint. Except this time, there was someone inside. A man in the driver's seat, looking down at what I assumed was his phone. The light of his dashboard lit up the bottom of his chin and nothing else. I couldn't see his face. I sat in my own car for a full minute with my hand on the door handle. I told myself not to be dramatic. Plenty of people sit in their cars on their phones. I got out, walked to my front door without looking over, and went inside. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom and peeked out between the blinds. The car was still there. 20 minutes later, still there. I finally pulled the blinds all the way shut, plugged my phone in, and went to bed. When I woke up in the morning and checked, it was gone. I told my best friend Sarah about it 2 days later on the phone. She said exactly what I would have said if she'd been the one telling me. You live in a quiet neighborhood. You notice everything. You're probably seeing the same delivery driver on his break, and your brain is doing a thing. She's a psych nurse. So when she says, your brain is doing a thing, I usually listen. I let it go. Except, it happened again, and then again. The 4th time, I was at a gas station. The sedan pulled into the pump across from mine and just sat there. Nobody got out. I kept my head down, filled my tank, and drove off. I watched my mirrors the entire way home. For most of the drive, there was nothing. Then, about a mile from my street, a pair of headlights appeared behind me and matched my turns. Not aggressively, not tailgating, just there for 4 blocks. They peeled off onto a side road before I got to my house. I couldn't tell for sure if it was the same car. I told myself it probably wasn't. That night, I called the non-emergency line. I gave them a rambling, half-apologetic description of what I'd been seeing and asked if they could just send someone by. A patrol car came through about an hour later, slowed down in front of my house, and moved on. The dark sedan wasn't on the street that night. I felt stupid and relieved in that order. The car didn't come back for 11 days. Long enough that I started to feel like I'd made up a pattern out of nothing. Long enough that when Sarah asked me about it the next time we talked, I laughed and said, "Yeah, I think I was being paranoid." The doorbell camera is the part where I stopped being able to tell the story in order because the next thing I learned didn't feel like a new development at the time. It felt like confirmation of the old one. I'd installed a video doorbell around the same time as my non-emergency call, mostly to make myself feel like I was doing something. One night in mid-October, I was on the couch watching something on my laptop, and the doorbell app pinged me with a motion alert. The notification said it was 2:13 a.m. I hadn't even realized it was that late. The clip was 11 seconds long, and all it showed was a pair of headlights passing through the top of the frame. I almost dismissed it. Then I scrolled back through the rest of the motion clips from that night. There were 6 of them, all between midnight and 3 a.m., all showing the same slow-moving light patterns on my front lawn. The way light falls when a car is idling across the street with its engine running. I cycled through 2 weeks of footage after that, sitting on the couch with my knees pulled up. The car was never in frame because my doorbell points at the front door and my driveway is offset to the right. But the lights he left on, the lights he turned off, the small shift in illumination when he repositioned, it was all there almost every night for at least 3 weeks that I could confirm from the SD card. I called the police the next morning. The officer took it seriously this time. He said there probably wasn't anything they could charge without a plate, but they'd increase patrols and asked me to document anything further. I thanked him. I sat on the couch for 10 minutes and cried because I finally felt allowed to. Then I went into the kitchen and made coffee and started my workday. Here is where the story breaks in half for me, because up until this point, I thought I understood what was happening. I thought there was a man in a car who had been parking on my street at night and watching my house, and the scariest thing I had left to deal with was the possibility he might escalate to approaching the door. That was bad, but it was a shape I understood. I had names for the parts. I had a plan. The version I didn't know I was in started showing itself the way these things always do. Not all at once. In small, stupid details I dismissed without thinking. One morning about a week after the call to the police, I got in my car to drive to a dentist appointment, and I noticed that the rearview mirror was tilted wrong, not a lot, angled down and slightly to the right toward the back seat, as if someone a little taller than me had been using it. I reached up, adjusted it without thinking, and backed out of the driveway. I figured I'd bumped it reaching for my sunglasses the day before. That's the kind of explanation your brain gives you when it wants to keep your morning moving. A few days later, on a Friday morning drive into town, I caught a smell in my car that I couldn't place. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, sharp and minty, like a particular brand of mouthwash or aftershave, or one of those strong breath mints you get at the counter of a restaurant. I cracked the window and it faded into the cold air. I told myself it was on my jacket from somewhere I'd been the day before, or that it had gotten into the upholstery from a friend I'd given a ride home the week prior. The radio came on and I stopped thinking about it. A week after that, I was reaching into the back seat to grab a grocery bag I'd forgotten, and I saw a small foil wrapper on the carpet behind the passenger seat. Spearmint lozenge. I don't chew lozenges. I picked it up and looked at it for a second too long, and then I dropped it in the trash can in my garage and forgot about it before I made it to the front door. I wasn't dismissing these things out of stupidity. I was dismissing them because in the version of the story I thought I was in, a man in a car had been parking on my street at night. That was a shape I had a plan for. It didn't account for a mirror tilted toward a seat I don't use. I found the envelope on a Saturday morning, about 2 weeks later, when I was vacuuming my car before driving up to visit my parents. I was doing the back seat first because my friend's dog had been in the car the weekend before and there was hair everywhere. I opened the passenger side rear door, lifted the floor mat to get the vacuum nozzle under it, and found a thick manila envelope lying flat against the carpet where it had been hidden by the mat above. My first name was written on the front of it in black marker in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I should have walked inside and called the police before I opened it. I didn't. I sat down right there on the concrete of my driveway with my back against the rear tire, and I opened it. Inside was a stack of printed photos, maybe 40 of them, all of me. And as I thumbed through them, I understood very slowly that they had all been taken from the same angle. The angle was not from across the street. It was not from outside my house. It was not from behind a tree in my backyard. It was from inside my own car, from the back seat. The photographs were of the back of my head mostly, my hair in a ponytail at a stoplight, the side of my face turned to check a blind spot, my hand resting on the gear shift, the shape of my jaw in the rearview mirror, reflected back from an angle that could only have been from the seat behind mine. A photo of me laughing with my mouth open at something on the radio. A photo of me on the phone, cradling it between my ear and my shoulder so I could shift gears. A photo taken from very low, from the floor of the back seat, looking upward. He had been lying in the rear footwell, and what he had photographed was the underside of the driver's seat and the thin sliver of the side of my face visible above it. A photo of me crying, taken on a day I remembered crying alone in my car, on the way home from a bad phone call with my brother. I had been alone in that car. I had not been alone in that car. I don't remember going back inside. I remember I was holding the envelope against my chest with both hands, which is a detail I wouldn't have put in a story I was making up because it sounds stupid, but it's what I was doing. I sat at my kitchen table. I looked at the photos again. I went back out to the car and I took the SD card out of the dashcam. I'd installed the dashcam 2 years earlier after a fender bender I wasn't at fault for. It was a 2-channel kind, front windshield, and a small lens that faced backward into the cabin, something my insurance had recommended for incident evidence. I had never once looked at the interior footage. I had honestly forgotten the interior lens existed until I was standing in my driveway, holding the card in my hand. It recorded onto a card and overwrote itself when full, which meant I had maybe 2 weeks of footage. And for the next 4 hours, I sat at my kitchen table and watched him ride in my car. He was there on the Tuesday morning drive, the one where I'd gone to the coffee shop in town I sometimes worked from when my house felt too quiet, folded into the footwell behind the passenger seat, knees pulled up to his chest, head down, until I turned onto the main road. Then he sat up. He watched the back of my head for almost 2 minutes while I drove with the radio on. When I started signaling for the turn into the lot, he folded himself back down and he was invisible again by the time I pulled into a parking space. He was there on the Thursday grocery run, lying flat across the back seat this time, feet against one door, head against the other, staring straight up at the roof of my car, listening to me sing along to a song I'd been sheepish about liking. He was there on the drive to my parents' house the weekend before the envelope. That one is the one I can't sit with yet. I had stopped halfway there, on a rural county road, because a deer had been standing in the road and I'd nearly hit it. After the deer wandered off into the brush, I had put the car in park and sat for maybe 2 or 3 minutes with the engine off because my heart was pounding. I remember that stop. I remember I texted my mom. I remember I talked to myself in the quiet. I said, out loud, to nobody, "You're fine, you're fine, keep going." The dashcam shows him during those minutes. He is sitting fully upright in the back seat, behind me and slightly to the right, close enough to the interior lens that I can see his face. He is watching the back of my neck. He is completely still. He does not blink. He is listening to me tell myself I'm fine in a car he is hiding in, 3 feet from my hair, and when I put the car back into drive, he lowers himself without a sound, and I drive another 40 miles with him in the back seat. On one clip, a Wednesday evening, coming home from the gym, I can see him take his phone out in the back seat. He's scrolling through photos on it, and the screen reflects faintly into the frame of my rearview mirror. I can't make out the images themselves, but I can see the way he's swiping, slowly, pausing on some. He is laughing to himself, very quietly, at the back of my head, while I am driving. There is a clip I've never told anyone about in detail. In it, his hand appears on the top of the driver's side headrest, and it stays there, resting, while I am driving with the radio on. I am singing. He moves his hand slowly across the top of the headrest and lets it drop, just over the shoulder of the seat, and there are maybe 6 inches of air between the tips of his fingers and the side of my throat. I do not feel him. I do not see him. I just keep singing. He keeps his hand there for a full minute. Then he pulls it back. That is what I mean when I say the car across the street was the decoy. I was never being watched from a car on my street. I was being watched from my own back seat by a man who had been letting himself into my unlocked car in the driveway before I came out in the morning and riding with me wherever I was going that day and climbing out after I was safely in the house. The car on the street was, at most, his parked vehicle between my trips. More likely, it was the place he sat to wait for my blinds to go dark so he could go back to the one place he actually wanted to be. I don't remember calling the police. I remember them arriving. I handed over the SD card and the envelope, and I tried to explain the timeline, and I failed because I was shaking so hard I kept losing sentences. They were kind. They took it all seriously. They dusted the car. They pulled prints. Between the back seat cushion and the seat back, they found a single long dark hair that was not mine. Behind the driver's seat, they found a phone charging cable I didn't own. Wedged into the seam of the rear footwell carpet, they found 3 more of the spearmint lozenge wrappers. They ran the face from the dashcam footage through whatever they run faces through, and if he matched anyone, they never told me so. My car stayed in police custody for almost 3 weeks, and when I finally got it back, I sold it to a dealership 4 days later without asking what they'd give me for it. I took whatever they offered. I moved back in with my mother for 2 months. I didn't go near the house except to pack, and only during the day, and only with her or my brother with me. I broke the lease. I lost the deposit. I found a new apartment in a different part of the state, on a 4th floor with a key fob and a covered garage that has cameras on every corner. And I'm okay. Most of the time, I'm okay. What I can't stop turning over are the things I'll never get to know. The dashcam card only held 2 weeks, but the envelope had photos of me in hairstyles I'd stopped wearing months earlier, a braid I'd given up in summer, bangs I'd grown out in the spring. The version of the story I can actually prove is a 2-week stretch of him riding with me. What the photos suggest is that it had been going on since before I ever noticed a dark sedan on my street at all. I don't know what I said on any of those drives. I drove to my therapist twice a week and talked to myself about the session the whole way home. I talked to my mom almost every time I went to her house. I talked to Sarah for hours on speakerphone. I cried about my brother in that car. I sang along to songs I would never have sung in front of another person. He heard all of it. I do not know what he did with what he heard. I do not know which of my secrets are still mine. I sold the car. I moved. I don't get into any car now without checking the back seat first, and then the footwells, and then the cargo area, and I check them again if I look away for more than a few seconds. I know I'm not going to find anything. I check anyway. The version of me who drove without thinking about it, who sang with her eyes on the road and her hands on the wheel, and never once looked over her shoulder, is someone I'm not going to be again. I never found out who he was. I never found out how long he'd been riding with me. I never found out what was on his phone. I just know that when I thought he was watching me from a car, he was. It just wasn't from the car across the street. It was from the seat behind mine.